Welcome. And for those of you who signed up by email, you should have gotten a link of a handout that you could use to follow along. You can grab a pen to write down your thoughts, to write down what you've learned. And I hope that you will gain something from this journey. There was once a very arrogant but genius of a man who decided to have fun with a simple guy that he knew. And he made a deal with him. He said, how about the following? Let's make a deal. Any question that I ask you and you don't know the answer, you owe me $5. But if you ask me a question that I don't know, I'll owe you $500. And he's already like getting excited. There's no way this simple guy is going to ask him a question that he won't know, and he'll just make some money. And surprisingly, the simple guy says, sure. The genius is already like, okay, well, he's so simple. So of course he said, yeah. So the genius says to the simple guy, do you know how many continents there are on planet Earth? The simple guy's like, I don't remember what I learned in school. No, I really don't know. And he hands the genius $5. And the genius says, okay, you have a question for me? Simple guy's like, yeah. Which animal stands on 2 legs but sleeps on 3? And the genius was like, whoa. For this simple guy, learn this from. He's racking his brain, he's thinking, which animal is going through the entire animal kingdom? Which animal stands on 2 legs but sleeps on 3? This thing's like, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Which animal, which one is it? What's the answer? Finally, shakes his head and he says, okay, you stumped me. Gives the simple guy $500. Then he's very curious. He says, let's continue this game. Simple guy says, sure. Genius says, so you tell me now, which animal stands on 2 legs but sleeps on 3? Simple person looks at him and says, I don't know, hands him $5 and walks away with $495 in his pocket. What the genius did very simply is underestimated his opponent. He thought if he doesn't know much, I for sure can win. And before we even go into the details of Klalei Chinuch Hadracha, before we go into the practical and insightful tools that the Frierdiker Rebbe teaches us in Klalei Chinuch Hadracha, the first perspective we need to open up our eyes to is that whether it's our own child or a student or anyone that we are in a position of influencing, we can never underestimate their abilities or potential. There is a Hatzalah member that I know who personally shared this following story, that when he was a young child, he had a teacher that really saw no hope for him. He couldn't concentrate in class. He didn't do well in his studies. He wasn't a class kid. Years later, his former teacher was having a heart attack. And they called Hatzalah, and the Hatzalah member came over and was working on him. And this person was barely conscious. And his teacher said to him, and I thought you were going to be a nobody. What we think about our students matters. What we think about our children matters. How we see them, but not just in the future. When they grow older, oh, they're going to have a lot of potential. How we see them now matters. How I look at my child, how I look at my students today is going to lay the foundation for any influence or any impact that I might want to have. And I learned a very interesting sikha that really underscores this idea. In Parashas Kairach, Rebbe asks, You have someone like Kairach, who literally rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu. He undermined the decision to have Aaron be a Kohen Gadol. He was, by all accounts, someone who did something not good, and yet we have a parsha named after him. Why? Why are we naming a parsha after somebody who was basically a rebel? And the Rebbe says, because there was a little spark of good. There was a little kernel of good in what Kairach did. He was very jealous of Aaron. He was very jealous that Aaron was a Kohen Gadol. The Rebbe says, do you see the kernel of good? He had a huge desire for a higher level of spirituality. Yeah, it manifested itself in rebelling against Moshe Rabbeinu, but he wanted to be more. The Rebbe says, when you want to go and influence another Yid, it's not enough to think, oh, in the future, this Yid could be from. In the future, the student could turn out okay and be a Hatzalah member. Right now, what is that kernel of good? What's going on in all the chaos and all the mess and in the parenting situation, in the classroom? What's good? Kids cheating on a test. Maybe the kernel of good is that he or she cares about his friends so much. In order to be able to influence, we have to be able to see the people in front of us at their best presently, where they are now. Similar to the way the Rebbe looks at a Yid. And the Rebbe says, no matter what Yid it is, a Yid is like an unintentional killer who runs to the Ir Miklat. Any Yid who does an Avera, even though on the outside it looks like they're doing the wrong thing and they want to do the wrong thing, really, not intentional. A Rosh something overcame them, but they at their core is to do what Hashem wants. So that's the foundational look, and that's the first work that we have to do. And it's actually a tool. The first tool is, before we react, before we think how we want to change our children, before we review the halachas of chinuch, of Klalei Chinuch, Hadracha, it's what glasses are we wearing? How are we looking at the children that are entrusted into our care? How do I perceive them? And if my perception of them is only external, then I haven't begun to do the work. Now, I remember learning Klalei Chinuch Hadracha years ago in seminary, and I think I learned it pretty well. But it was only once I started teaching and once I started having children that I was able to appreciate and learn and relearn again and again the wisdom that the Friedrich Rebbe imparts. Now, the Friedrich Rebbe makes something very, very clear in his introductions to Klalei Chinuch Hadracha. Friedrich Rebbe says the following: teaching is not easy. No one thinks teaching is easy. Teaching a skill is very difficult. You have to see what level the child is on, whether it's Chumash, whether it's math, whether it's Navi, whatever age, whatever you're teaching is not easy. So you would think that teaching, chinuch, teaching and educating is similar to Hadracha, which is guiding our students. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, you're right. In certain ways, they're similar, but in certain ways, they're very different. If you don't teach something properly, okay, so a child will grow up missing a certain skill in life. But if we don't guide our children properly, if we don't guide our students properly, not only are we not doing them a service, but we're doing them a disservice. We have a sacred obligation to spend time, which you're all doing because you're on here tonight, not just to sit and write lesson plans. What's my hook? What's going to be my intro? What are going to be my, questions, higher order thinking? We prepare a lot of the lesson plans. But the Friedrich Rebbe says we need to spend just as much time preparing the Hadracha, the guidance. And when you look at let's say, preschool age curriculum, we know it's there. We teach children shapes and colors, and we spend so much time on social and emotional skills. And the truth is, that could never end. The development of midas is our responsibility as parents and as educators lifelong. And just like we set aside time to plan for the class, and we get tips and we do classroom management and we try to figure it out, that's what we have to do for their social, emotional, spiritual development. So while tonight we're going to look at some tools and we're going to speak things that are practical, at the same time, only you could be the one to implement it. Because what the Friedrich Rebbe establishes is that you need the time to brainstorm and think, hey, how am I going to implement this into my home? How am I going to implement this into my classroom? So if you have the handout, we're going to start from Ice Bays in the beginning. The Friedrich Rebbe says all the way in the beginning, Avodas hayra b'limud im hayes gam he avodas rab achrayus. Teaching is also hard. Aval einena klal ke'achrayusa shel ha'avoda b'chinuch v'hadracha. It's not nearly the same responsibility, right? V'hayra b'limud gam imenu bar pel harei kapanim le'kalko. Because if you don't teach them something, if they're absent, you're not ruining anything. But b'avodas ha'chinuch v'hadracha sha'achrayusa kedai l'ma'ay dim ena mitakan hayra b'hechra she'yikalko. If you're not fixing, if you're not actively working to impact and influence and guide our children and our students, it is automatic that they will be regressing. It's going to happen automatically, and it takes so much work, similar to the story of the Rebbe Maharash, who was sweating after Yechidus. And he explains, I was sweating, of course I was sweating. When I heard my chassid speaking, I had to completely put myself into listening to him. And then I had to take off my listening hat and put on my Rebbe hat and give him advice. The mental effort and the energy that it took, of course I'm going to sweat. It's a workout. And chinuch and hadracha specifically is a workout. And we cannot pretend that there's not what to fix, because children are a work in progress. You know, there was 2 cows in a field, and one cow says to the other one, hey, did you hear about mad cow disease? There's this new disease going around. And the other cow's like, no, what is it? And the first cow says, mad cow disease makes cows go completely insane. And the first cow says, oh, really? Well, then, good thing I'm a helicopter. He'd already lost it. He was in denial. Being in denial about the character traits that are presenting in front of us, not dealing with it, not addressing it, not only does it benefit, but it causes harm. So how do you change them? How can we influence our students? Here's the first thing. The first question to ask yourself when you know you're making time, you know you're setting aside time to plan character building and hadracha. The question is, do you value struggle? Is this something you could appreciate? Because if you want to get one of your children to work on themselves, they're late and it's hard for them to come on time. They're not organized, studying a skill. In order for them to appreciate the effort and the joy and the accomplishment that comes from working on themselves, it has to be apparent that you appreciate hard work and effort. There's a story of Reb Mordechai of Neschitz. There's a story of Reb Mordechai of Neschitz that owned a talis katan. He had a pair of tzitzis, but he really wanted one from Eretz Yisrael. So after a lot of effort, his Hasidim finally managed to bring a leather piece of wool cloth from Eretz Yisrael. And one of his Talmidim asked for the schos, could I be the one to cut the hole and prepare this wool into tzitzis? And he was so excited but he had by mistake made a false fold. So when he opened the tzitzit after he had cut it, he realized it was not one hole, but two. And he was mortified. And he was so embarrassed. How am I going to face my Rebbe? I destroyed this spear of wool. I made the tzitzis look funny. There's like a hole for the head, and then there's another hole. And he came crying to Reb Mordechai. And Mordechai said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I'm so sorry, my Rebbe. You were waiting for this cherished object, and now look, I ruined it." And Reb Mordechai said, "Repeat, there's nothing to be afraid of. Don't you realize that a talis katan needs two holes? One for me to put my head through, and the other to test me to see whether I'm going to lose my head." He looked at it as a test to see if it's something he could overcome. If we want to encourage our students to work on their shortcomings, do we appreciate what that effort is? And the Friedrich Rebbe explains like this. If you got a fertile piece of land and you planted seeds and watered it and everything worked out okay, you'd feel good about it. But if you got a piece of land that needed work and then you succeeded, the good feeling is incomparable. And all of us have things that we have to work on. Deep, dark, painful things that we really, really, really struggle with. And in our personal lives, do we look at them as something shameful? Or do we look at them as opportunities for our biggest joy? Because if something's really hard for me, if it's really hard for me to be happy and I'm able to be happy, it's really hard for me to be organized and I am organized. If something's really hard for me and I feel so much more joy from it, that's going to give me an ability to help my students see that. So the self-reflection, the tool, and again, these are pieces of information that actually help children overcome their challenge. When you can get them to see that it's not just a source of pain, shame, or embarrassment, but it brings real joy. Oisher nitzri, in the words of the Friedrich Rebbe. You know what's going to bring you true joy? When something that is so hard for you, you're shy and you're going to reach out to a friend. It's so hard for you to have self-control. You just want to call out during class. Every time you don't call out, you're a gibar. You're amazing. That's incredible. Celebrating it. If you could value overcoming struggle as a strength, and you could celebrate it in the people around you, that's going to directly impact their ability to work on themselves. That is part of the guidance. The guidance is to teach our children our challenges are the potential for the biggest joy. Because when I am naturally inclined to do something and I have the smallest of victories, it gives me a deep sense of joy. So what's the next step? What's the next step in influencing students? And if you notice so far, we keep talking about our own work. And we start to realize that way before we get to influencing and impacting the people around us, we have a lot of our own work to do. They say that President Biden called in the heads of the CIA and he said, there's something that I really have a hard time with. How is it that the Jews know everything before we know? Before I'm updated, the Jews in Brooklyn, they know. So the CIA chief says it's very simple. The Jews have this expression called "was tut es." The president says, what does that mean? He says, it's a Yiddish expression, and it means what's happening. It just means what's happening. But when one Jew meets another Jew and says, "was tut es," they just know. They just know what's going on. They just know everything. The president is like, okay, I have to check this out for myself. So he goes undercover, dresses like an Orthodox Jew, comes in an unmarked plane, comes to Brooklyn, and he sees a Jew, and the president says to him, "Hey, was tut es?" And the old guy whispers back to him, Biden is in Brooklyn. Very often, everybody knows something. And you know who's the last one to know? You know who's the last one to discover that we have a certain character defect? Ourselves. I remember it hit me so strongly when I took driving lessons. I couldn't get over the idea of a blind spot. There's literally something I can't see. Like, I look in the mirrors, I have to look over my shoulders. It's like a blind spot. It exists, but I don't see it. And the Friedrich Rebbe explained that we as people, because we love ourselves so much, we are blind to ourselves. Before we go around fixing other people, before we get all the good ideas how to fix our children and our students, are we working on ourselves? This is actually a tool for influencing. Nothing is as impactful as when we work on ourselves. And we can say it out loud. You know, I'm working on being organized. I know personally, the more I've worked on myself and the more I've become aware of certain things, it's just unbelievable to see it translated, the more it impacts the girls that I'm working with. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, before we continue to guide our students, we have to make our own, and it's Chaydish Elul, so it's a perfect time for it. When was the last time we made a real Chaydish Elul internal, stock keeping? When was the last time we worked on ourselves and saw what our blind spots were? Everybody else knows. When was the last time we asked a mashpia, a friend, to give us their input? There's a story of Rabbi Elimelech from Lezhensk and his brother Reb Zusha. They used to go from town to town getting Yidden to do tshuva. And this is how they did it. They didn't come and start giving musar, and you are so terrible, and this is what you do. What they would do is, they would come to town, and one brother would pretend to be a balavera, and the other one would pretend to be the Rebbe. And the balavera would say, Rebbe, I sinned, I've been lying, I haven't been honest in my business. Please, what should I do? How do I do tshuva? And the Rebbe would say, you should say Tehillim. And they would do this in public, as if they were oblivious. And other people in the shul would hear. And wait, am I honest in my business? Do I? And as people heard them, it inspired and awakened their own tshuva. And in fact, one time they came to this town, and the balavera, the brother that acted as the one who needed tshuva, said to his brother, he says, what should I do? I have a pair of tefillin since my bar mitzvah that's empty. I never opened it and checked it, and just recently I found out that for so many years I was putting on tefillin with nothing inside, no parshiyas. And the host in the town they were staying heard, and he realized that he never had his tefillin checked. And he went to have his tefillin checked, and he found out his tefillin were empty. And he cried, and he cried, and he cried. And actually, Rabbi Elimelech instructed his brother Reb Zusha to write a set of parshas for their hosts. And many years later, these tefillin were actually found by Rabbi Yitzchak of Berdichev. You want to influence people? You want to change people? Inspire them. Work on yourself. This is an actual tool, right? The more we as the adults are working on ourselves, the more respectable, the more of role models that we are, the more it will translate into our children and our students. And it's a prerequisite. But the more in tune that you are with yourself, the more you set time, not to guilt yourself or trip yourself up, but to be honest with where you're holding. In Avodas Hashem, in relationship with people, is there a relationship that needs to be fixed? The more you work through your stuff, the more you develop that gift. And it ends up being logical, because the self-awareness will translate into how you affect your students. You're going to be able to take yourself out of being so subjective and being blind to yourself to becoming more objective about yourself. And that will translate in your ability to be objective and proactive in your students and not just being reactive to them in the moment and troubleshooting. So what does the Friedrich Rebbe say? Do that prior work. Do that moral inventory. Do that first. And then figure out how to teach your children. And what the Friedrich Rebbe says is that there are people who think the stricter and scarier they are, the more control they have, and therefore the more they're going to impact their students. And the Friedrich Rebbe says no. When we yell, and we sometimes make that mistake and we're going to yell, what we actually accomplish is that our students actually lose their respect for us. And we don't have an ability to transmit the values that we want to transmit so badly. So the Friedrich Rebbe says, you have a topic, you have something you want your child to work on, plan how to say it. Think. And again, it takes work. You want your child to be kinder to their siblings. Share stories. You know, I read recently how a mother used stories of the Friedrich Rebbe and how he budgeted and saved his money for the Gemach and how he thought whether he should buy sperm with it. She used that as a teachable moment to teach her child about the value of money. And this goes back to what we're saying in the beginning. The same way we think how to teach a pasuk chumash, how to teach a pasuk navi, is to think, how do we want to teach the values that we want to teach our children? So wait, I have to know what my values are. I have to sit with a pen and paper, sit maybe with a spouse, sit with another teacher. We have to create time in our calendar to create this Hadracha piece. What value do I want my student to have? Oh, honesty? How am I teaching it? The Friedrich Rebbe says, prepare pisgamim. We could prepare stories. But in order to teach something proactively, we have to prepare it. I'm reading the quote from Ice K. Besides for the sharp personal inventory and even, not criticism, but besides for the personal work I need to do, by Reis Pinucha Hadragasei B'Signainam, Tzarech Levakar Atmai, we also have to ask ourselves internally, by Fane, the ways Hayras Pinucha Hadragasei. How are we planning on going about teaching a value that we have? It should be pleasant. It should be polite. We should find different quotes that are appropriate. We should speak it nicely. In order to engrave it into our children, right? Because if we're constantly screaming, hang up your briefcase, organize, that's not going to be able to be engraved into their hearts. But if we have a conversation, a puppet show, a discussion, a proactive talk about a value, then we're going to be able to effectively be mechanech that. And so some questions you could think to yourselves are, have you made your own Elul stock taking? And are you taking the time to think what values you want to give over and how you're teaching it? So you're looking at your students with positive eyes. You realize you have to plan Hadracha. You get to know yourself better and you really work towards becoming a better person. You know the values that you want to work on. Think of ways that you could bring it into the class. What's next? There was a mother who gave birth to two identical twins. And she decided she wanted to give them up for adoption. She couldn't raise them. The one twin went to a family in Egypt and was named Amal. The other twin was sent to a family in Spain and was named Juan. Years later, Juan sent his birth mother a picture of himself. And the mother was so warmed by it. She said to her husband, she's like, I wish I would also get a picture of Amal. She missed her babies that she had given away. And her husband says, they're identical twins. If you've seen one, you've seen Amal. If you've seen one, you've seen them all. We sometimes make that mistake. You know, I think I have 4 boys, one after another. Oh, they're just copies. They're just one after another. No. We think we know students. Yeah, I've seen high school girls. I already know what they're like. The Friedrich Rebbe says, you want to be able to influence? It's the exact opposite of if you've seen one, you've seen them all. In order to influence your students and children, you need to get to know them as an individual. Now, I remember a few years ago, I took a life coaching course. And there was a huge emphasis in coaching. You want to help somebody? You need to assess them. We learned so many different types of assessment, because how could you help somebody if you don't know them? If you don't know personality, if you don't know their strengths, if you don't know their weaknesses. The same way we assess math and Chumash skills, we need to be able to come up with a way to assess the personality of our children, because it's not one size fits all. We have to be able to make judgment calls based on the student's character and personality. If we want them to be able to change, they're not all up to the same place. So the 2 pillars of what we need to know about each one of the students in our classroom is, first of all, their character, their personality. Are they loud? Are they quiet? Are they, introverted? Are they extroverted? Where do they come from? The Friedrich Rebbe goes through different lists. Do they live in a rural place? Do they live in an urban place? Right? Those out-of-towners. And also, the first thing is their character, and the second thing is their situation. What's going on at home? What tools do they have? Who's supporting them? If you want to be able to impact someone or influence somebody, it almost sounds so logical, but it's something that we have to take the time to do. Because if we otherwise, we might make a mistake. We might make a goal that's not attainable. What if a child just can't do something? It says that many people tried to reach the level of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and they failed, and it hurt them. The only way to know if a child is capable of reaching a certain goal is if you assess them and know that they can reach that target. And for some reason, again, we often do it when kids are little, and as they get older, we aren't doing it. And this is really time. We're taking the time before school to say, are we thinking about this individual child and what they need to work on? Is this the most important thing for them right now? Are they a little fidgety and therefore it's okay if they have a fidget? Are they loud? Do they need to get something? Do they, they need to doodle? What is it about their personality? Because it's the ramification is that when you understand the child and you understand the personality, you will treat them different. You will understand, right? Sometimes we take things personally. We think kids are dafka out to get us. And then we understand, oh, it's not dafka. Kid didn't mean to hurt us. It's a kid's personality. I could work on it, but when I start to think in dafka terms, it hurts my ego. And when I think in terms of the child and what they're made of, I can actually help them. And so in order to help our students, we have to assess them. We have to get to know them. We have to get to know their strengths. Till today, I'm grateful to my 4th grade teacher who noticed that I like art, and she brought that out of me and she encouraged me to paint. Until today, it's such an outlet. And so the tool is get to know your students. And the question is, how? What are you as a student or parent going to do to get to know your student? You could observe them. Are you going to have someone help you with the assessment? How are you going to get to know them? And the Friedrich Rebbe actually gives example in Isaiah, and he says, you know, for a woman to curl her hair is perfectly appropriate, and maybe for a man it's not. For an Adam Chasha, for an important person, certain things might not be appropriate, and for someone else it might. Like, it really depends on the kid. For certain kids, if they're not up to there, it's the least of your worry. So when you want to guide somebody, you have to get to know them. And the Friedrich Rebbe is very, it goes very specific. What's their financial situation like at home? Are they wealthy? Are they not wealthy? Are they staying in a dorm, if that's relevant? Who are the children in front of you? You have to know their age, you have to know their stage, you have to know what's age appropriate. The Friedrich Rebbe gives the mashal out, like, if you would feed a baby meat, the baby would die, and if you would feed an adult only if you drop some milk, the adult would die. Like, it has to be age appropriate. And the Friedrich Rebbe actually starts saying, a young child, we focus on seder v'nekayim, we focus on cleanliness. And then as they get older, you start to focus on derech eretz and kibbud avim. There's like a system here. The same way in reading, we have a system, what we teach, whether it's Kriya or the ABCs, we teach this. There's level 1, there's level 2, and there's level 3. Emotionally, spiritually, socially, there has got to be a game plan. And the game plan is getting to know them so that you could then assess. Where's your student holding? What are they up to? And the Friedrich Rebbe says it's like clothing, right? If I wore a dress that was too long, I would strip. And if it was too short, I would be cold. You want to know the secret to guiding people? You want to know the secret to really making an impact? You have to get to know them. And the Friedrich Rebbe says it's also important to get to know them, not just so that you can have a game plan, but so that you could flip their weaknesses and turn it into strengths. So I would ask you, is having confidence a good thing? Well, it could be a very good thing. Someone that doesn't have confidence will be shy and timid, and they won't do things, and confident people will just get out there. But also confident people might be arrogant and step on people. So if you get to know the student, you say, oh, this is the weakness. Let me help the student channel it. Right? That kid who you just have to make them a leader. Channel their weakness into a strength. That's how you influence children. Friedrich says also being humble. Is that a good trait? Is that a good quality? It's a wonderful quality, but also it could hinder you. You're so humble, you feel, oh, I can't do it. I can't. Low self-esteem or being shy. The weakness could be flipped and turned into a strength, because humble people can be so caring and kind and perceptive. When I wrote the book, I Could Be Mevater, children's book, I got some criticism, and I had some mothers tell me, my daughter has the opposite problem. She's always Mevater. I need to teach her the opposite. And I thought about it, and I realized, yeah, the same way as confidence a good thing, is humility a good thing. Everything could go one extreme, one way or the other, and it's our responsibility to look at the kid in front of us and say, wait, this kid needs to learn how to channel their weakness into a strength. The bossy kid needs to learn how to become a leader. The timid kid might have to learn how to recognize that their quiet strength, their ability to have self-control. There are so many positive qualities hidden in every seemingly negative one. And that's the tool. Get to know your students, even their weakness. And it's not just like what we said before, we just celebrate it when they overcome it, but channel it. Here's the next tool the Friedrich Rebbe says. And again, we're just doing an overview. I encourage you to go inside and learn the entire text. But important pointers to start the year with. Today, we know of the concept of neuroplasticity. that our mind is very, very flexible. So for example, I might have gone home a certain way for 20 years and I don't even think about it anymore. I walk home from school to my house, comes autopilot. We can have, autopilot, a habit. It's very hard to change a negative habit. But they discovered in neuroscience, it's hard to change an old neuron, but it's easy to create a new one. Instead of saying, don't go home that way, don't go home that way, I can say, okay, I'm going to set an alarm and go home a different way. The Friedrich says a tool is create a new habit. And in our terminology, it's rewire the brain. Instead of just focusing on don't do that, don't spill, don't make a mess. Last time you made a mess, rewire, redirect. Walk around the puddle. Come to the front. Understanding the nature of habits, it's very hard to break old ones, but that we have the ability, our brain has the ability to adapt to new ones. That's where the emphasis has to be. So we got to know our students, we prepared, we thought of Piskamim, we thought of ways to impact them, we were perceptive, we thought, it's not unimportant where they live, it's important where they live, what their environment was, where they picked it up. And if you read some of the prakim, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet, and Klalei Chinuch, Hadracha, the Friedrich just writes so beautifully about the love that has to exist between the educator and the guide, right? The mechanech has to have such a love, and the pupil has to feel it. This is the type of relationship that we're trying to accomplish. But I want to jump all the way to Ice Test Zion. For me personally, this tool has been the biggest game changer. If I were to ask you right now, think of any of your children or students, make a portfolio in your head. Do you know what they need to be working on right now? The Friedrich says like this: human nature works that we have very strong wills and willpowers. And we want something when we want it. And if a kid wants to lie, or if a kid wants to steal, or if a kid wants to get angry, they really, really want it. The advice is gold. The Friedrich says if you have a child that has two challenges, he exaggerates or lies, and he also gets angry, pick one to work on. One theme. You can't catch them on everything. Pick the worst one. Like in addiction terminology, they say if somebody has a few addictions, work on the addiction that's killing the person the fastest. What that means is that if you're working on anger and the kid might say something, you can't give it attention. Otherwise, the resistance will be so strong. The kid will feel like, I can't work on this and this and this. And sometimes we issue a spring up and be respectful and don't fight and don't be jealous and say the truth and hang up and be. We overflood their system. What's the value that this child needs to be working on right now? Proactively, what am I doing for the Hadracha? Taking my students' age into account. What's the most important thing for them? Is it obviously Yisrael? And again, it doesn't mean we don't teach the right values. Of course, everybody knows. But the Friedrich is saying, and I'm going to read it inside. Asher al kein hine hamechanech v'hamadrech, right? This educator levad zayis asher tzarech alachat v'mechonech v'midrash la'at. Slowly. We expect our children to be perfect overnight. It's a work in progress. We're not going to see big results. Like a little baby that's taking baby steps. Choose and what has to come first. To be very careful. Avoid trying to work on two things at the same time. whether you're trying to get rid of a bad character trait or inculcate a positive one, at one time. For example, let's say this person in front of you has two chesronim, right? Magzim, the shakran, lie, does not say the truth. And also kasan, right? Both. Pick the first one. The yifchar ba'aisai hachasaren shehu misukin yeser. Pick the more dangerous one. Ubishtei hachasaren is the shecha veriticha. And amongst the two, which one's worse? The anger. So the tool is make a list of all the values you want to work on. Plan how you're going to teach everything. And then pick one at a time per child. So if I have 4 children, what are each of my children? What's like most important for them? Is it a specific relationship thing? Is it a specific, whether it's kibbut of aim, listening, zrizas, any of the midas that need to be tackled? Of course, you want to encourage them to live a life of a yid, the same way we say brachas and negovas and tzitzis and everything. We want them to also get tzedakah and do mitzvahs, behidra and everything. But like, if it's something that's hard for them, if you're trying to help them make friends, if you're trying to help them go out of their comfort zone, one. And not try to rectify more than one thing at a time. And here's the final tool that we're going to leave you with, that the Friedrich Rebbe leaves us with. The tool is as follows. There are many, many, many ways to teach our children. One of the most powerful ways that we could teach them is when we catch them doing something right and use words of praise to teach. So if my children are in the basement and they take out a toy and they didn't take out all the toys, and I say to one of them, wow, you took out only one toy and you didn't take out all the other toys, you're building them. Friedrich Rebbe says, and I know this might sound controversial, words of praise are a tool the same way an artist uses a paintbrush. For a mechanech, words of praise are a tool to build and teach. And when we're giving hashpa, when we're teaching and we're using negative words, then the effect is the exact opposite. It's not building them. We need to be able to use words to build our children. And it doesn't mean we never slip up, but the aim, the ideal that we're striving towards is to have the praise itself be the teacher. Oh, good, you didn't make a mess. Oh, good, you're standing online quietly. To the child. And using it not as a way that the child has to earn it, not to earn your love, but this is still a vital tool to teach your children. The Shalah explains the following pasuk in a very, very interesting way. Al teicheach let's, don't rebuke a fool, pen yisanacha, because he's going to hate you. Teicheach l'chacham v'ayavecha, rebuke a chacham and he's going to love you. And the Shalah explains, listen to this. Al teicheach let's, don't rebuke your students by calling them a let's, by calling them a fool, by calling them lazy. They're going to hate you. They're not going to be receptive. Tell them how smart they are. Oh, you're too smart. You're so smart. I know you know how to behave in class. They're going to love you. They're going to be responsive to what you're saying. Build them up. This is a keli, just like in any other dvar umnus. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, "Hahilul v'hasheva magbiyas hamachonot v'madroch." You're literally raising them. Lahitzia mimatzava. You're taking him out of his current situation. You're literally building them when you encourage them, and that is a tool for influence and change. And so the question that you can ask yourself is, are you making a conscious effort to use praise, not just after the fact, but to build the character, to teach in that way? There were once 3 contractors who came to bid on fixing a broken fence in the White House. So there was a contractor from New York, from Tennessee, and from Minnesota, and they went with the White House official to see the fence. The guy from the Minnesota, he takes his tape measure, he takes his pencil, he measures the fence, and says, okay, I could do this for $900, $400 for the materials, $400 for my crew, and $100 profit. The Tennessee guy measures also, looks, he thinks, he said, I could do this for $700. Pretty sure. $300 for the material, $300 for the crew, and $100 for profit. Then comes the guy from New York. The guy from New York doesn't measure, doesn't do anything, whispers into the White House official, I can do this for $2,700. So the White House official says, but you didn't measure. What do you, what? What's the $2,700? You don't even know. So the guy from New York says, very simple. 1,000 for me, 1,000 for you, and 700 to get the guy from Tennessee to do it. We think that chinuch is something we could outsource to the teachers, to the school, to the professionals. Chinuch is not something we could outsource to a guy from Tennessee. Chinuch and Hadracha is something that we as parents have to do and put effort into. And it's strenuous effort. It's a workout like any other. And that we have to do with the students that were placed into our care. We're not free from the responsibility of raising them, of educating them, of thinking of ways to build them up, and in a very respectful way, teaching them the values that we hold so dear to us. I wish us all Hadracha, a good Gebenchjahr, Hadracha on getting to know ourselves better, our character and our situation, and Hadracha with getting to know our students and our children better, their character, their situation, and really guiding them one thing at a time. Thank you for joining. Good night.